Welcome to Equal Inspired, the inclusive podcast, brought to you by Equal IT. Susanne Tedrick joins us, who is an infrastructure specialist for Azure, Microsoft's cloud computing platform. In her work, Susanne helps her clients address the needs and challenges surrounding cloud adoption, migrating on-premise workflows to the cloud, and cost optimization. Susanne previously worked as a technical specialist for IBM Cloud. Now, Susanne is fiercely committed to increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is the author of the critically acclaimed Women of Color in Tech, which is a blueprint for inspiring and mentoring the next generation of technology innovators. And this was published by John Wiley Sons in 2020. Susanne spends a lot of her time supporting several nonprofits and is the vice chair of the Advancing Tech Talent and Diversity Executive Council for CompTIA. She is also the coalition member for NPower's Command Shift Initiative and the winner of CompTIA's 2020 Diversity Technology Leader Spotlight Award for her advocacy in improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in tech. And finally, Susanne is the host of Wiley's Diversity in Tech webinar series. We are so excited to welcome Susanne as our first guest for Equal Inspired.
Thank you, Ellie. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really honored.
Firstly, we'd really love to know who or what is inspiring you at the moment.
That's a fabulous question. I think right now, in terms of inspiration, it's actually people that I've met through the course of writing my book and then subsequently reading it. And what's heartened me is people sharing their personal stories with me about their career journeys or their career milestones, and just seeing their success and how far they're going. It's inspiring for me, especially on days that seem to be a little bit more mentally taxing, just to see how they're thriving and they're being successful, and even in their challenging moments. They're still shining. So it's definitely the people that I have the pleasure of knowing through reading my book or mentorship. It's phenomenal, the things that are going on in their lives.
Conversation can just re-energize you so much. If you're speaking to people who are going through similar challenges and hearing their lessons learned, it gives you that feeling that you're not necessarily alone as well when you're going through these things. And we'll touch on your book a little bit later, Susanne. I'm not sure if you can see, but it is here on my shelf. It has a very gracious place, and I've been reading, and there's some really fantastic insights to extract from your book. So I'm excited to dive into that also. Growing up, you never really imagined yourself to pursue a career in technology, and obviously you come into the technology space a little bit later on in your career. So can you describe to us your journey into technology?
Sure. Definitely not typical, but actually not that uncommon. So I previously worked in financial services, mostly in administrative and operations type roles, and they were good paying, they were stable and solid, and I got good marks, but they weren't necessarily things that I was interested in. And if for anyone that's ever worked in financial services, and I don't mean to knock the industry, but it can be for someone that craves like creativity and other things, it can be a little dull. So I decided at one point to really try to understand technology a little bit better and what that means for my particular career. It was always something that I had been interested in as a kid. I've said this before, but like I was the person that would take apart my parents' appliances just to see how they work, much to their consternation. And I was just always just very fascinated by computers and technology. And so I said I owe it to myself to figure out if this is something that's going to be something that I can do, and if so, what. And I went on this very long journey, going back to school, but also pursuing as many professional development and academic opportunities as I can, volunteerism, boot camps, hackathons, you name it, just to kind of get the understanding of what tech is, and where my place is going to be. And it was through all of those efforts that I ended up landing a technical sales internship and then a full-time job at IBM. And so that was kind of my entry into technology, and cloud computing, which is where I specialize in for my day-to-day job. And I don't want to discount that it was hard. It definitely was, but it was definitely something that I'm glad that I did, versus staying in a career that I knew wasn't serving me well from a skills perspective and mental illness perspective, just like knowing that I wasn't happy doing this work. Yeah, that was my journey into tech. But as I've learned from talking to many people, my experience is definitely not unique, in that there are people who later in life discover technology careers and are happy and thriving.
Your journey into technology is fantastic. How you actually found that courage to come away from an industry and a career that you had immersed yourself in for so long, because that's also not easy, right? It's that having security and stability and then pursuing something new. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, how were those feelings, knowing that you were going into effectively the unknown?
I don't want to sugarcoat this either. It definitely wasn't easy at times. So first there was the perspective of my immediate, family and friends, just kind of trying to understand, well, what are you doing exactly? Like, why are you, like, you have a good job, you're stable, you have a good husband, like, why now? Why, like, can you find other ways to do this? And to be quite honest, what I probably don't emphasize to people is that I had been thinking about this for quite some time before I had, made that commitment to say this is what I'm going to do, and trying to figure out, well, can I just change certain aspects of my career and be happy? And the answer was ultimately no. Like, this was one of those things where, like, I did need to make a drastic change, and and I was willing and committed to doing it. But then as you're doing the change, it's hard. I remember, the days that I, got disappointing news, like I didn't get this job offer, I didn't get this opportunity. Still had to do the pressures of, my full-time employment. A lot of things that just kind of happen along the way that are disappointing, and trying to find the courage to keep going, even if you may not necessarily have everybody understanding what you're trying to do. And then you're constantly kind of getting this negative feedback in the world, just like, we're not ready for you yet. We're not ready for you yet. So no, it was definitely challenging. I will say that the things that really got me through was definitely having a support network, having wonderful family and friends, having great mentors who could kind of understand where I was coming from and what I was trying to do, and being kind, to myself, like giving myself reminders that this is a process. And even after I get to a destination, it's not the end. It's like it's more of a marathon than it is a sprint. And just constantly reminding myself that you're going to have those days where it's going to be really hard, and you're just like, I can't, I'm done. But to remember what you value and what you hold true and what's important to you, and let that kind of be the guiding force to keep you moving.
Definitely. I mean, I'm a big advocate also of almost letting your adversity fuel your motivation to do better and to fuel your success. And it's just so refreshing to hear the resilience that you had, because it's not easy, right? There are challenges along the way, but it's how can we grow from those and how can we learn moving forwards? And I think you're a fantastic example of that, Susanne, in everything you've achieved, not just now being in the tech, but with the community piece and how you work to make an impact and a difference. If you could give advice to your younger self when you just started to take that step into the tech space, in that pursuing that career, what would that be?
Believe in yourself more. And it's something that I still have to tell myself every day, because you, I don't know if this is true for you, but you kind of set these things in your head where, I have to be this professional, I have to get this thing done. And there are days where you feel like, I'm not quite meeting that, but then you're also de-emphasizing the value that you bring, the skills that you have, and that you're actually like really crushing it. You're really killing it more than you think you are. If you would just give yourself the grace to feel those feelings, it would be amazing for your career. And I think had I had that attitude, in my younger self, and if I had that, if I fully had that attitude now, I feel like the amount of career success just grows exponentially.
Do you know what? That resonates so much with me. I think naturally we can at times just be our worst critics. And like you say, even though we're doing fantastic work, it's almost like to us it's not enough. And oh, I could have done that better. I could have done this better. But it's a case of actually taking a step back and seeing how far you've come. Because I do feel that sometimes when we're following a career goal, we can almost get lost in that process and forget the journey we've had and the wins that we've had along the way. And I really believe that celebrating those little wins is an important thing to do so we don't get lost in that journey.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I kind of had that happen at work yesterday. So there's a service that reviews books and gives summaries, and my book apparently was selected for a review, and they gave their review, and they gave their review a 7 out of 10. And so, like, of course, it's 7 out of 10 is great.
Mm.
So, like, I'm not knocking that at all. But of course, the perfectionist in me is like, oh man, like kind of doing this backflip, like if I did this, if I did this. But then I had to remind myself of like, but think about the impact that you've had and that you've been able to see, and keeping that in perspective. Plus, the people that I've been able to meet, the experiences that I've been able to have, I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. And so I'm like, and plus, like, you got reviewed. Like, it's for anyone that's written a book, it's very hard to get in front of anybody for a review. So it's like, honoring the great things that you've done. It may not be perfect, but I mean, you're having an impact. Celebrate it.
You actually have a published book, and this is not an easy thing to do whatsoever, actually creating a book as well. So that in itself is like an unbelievable achievement.
Thank you. Yes, and as I said in the acknowledgments, if I had to pick the top 5 hardest things I've ever like done in my life, this is definitely writing a book is definitely in that list.
I can imagine. I mean, sometimes I lose my trail of thought when I'm trying to do like a LinkedIn post. So to write a book, I can only imagine the difficulties, but you got there. Going back to playing with technology when you were younger, what do you feel held you back from actually pursuing that at a younger age and taking that educational piece? What was that, I guess, stigma that was surrounding you to hold you back?
I think it was actually a number of different things. I've shared candidly with people that my mother had been ill, and her illness in many ways, shapes, or forms, they really impacted the lifestyle and of myself, and how many of my family members in my household had lived. And so I think for me at the time, it was more about just making sure that the family and getting through, versus really thinking deeply and holistically about, well, what would a career kind of look like. So there is that piece that I think is a little bit unique and individual, but to a larger point that I think a number of other women kind of feel is that not really having role models that look like them, or are doing technology work in their lives to kind of even talk about that very deeply. And then, do you have the support to be successful? and not just talking about in the home, but academically, or when you're starting your first professional job. It really is that support that's integral from throughout the time that you're as a child, and you're developing skills and interests, to the point where you're coming into the workforce for the first time, and you're trying to navigate, well, what does it mean to be a technology professional? And I think for myself, you just kind of thinking about my own experiences, I wouldn't say that they were very strong influences for me to to kind of pursue certain things. I also wasn't, and I think this is more, again, more individual. I also wasn't someone that was like a rock star when it came to like my science and math classes. Like, like I wasn't terrible, but I mean, like, for all intents and purposes, you would not have pegged me as like a math or science scholar. And I think sometimes when people make that equation, they're like, well, is this person really geared for like a rigorous technology or STEM related field? So I think it's a number of different factors. Some of them are individual, and some of them are more societal, that kind of played into why it took so long for me to kind of really consider a technology career.
I appreciate you sharing, and obviously, I'm very sorry that you had to experience that growing up, and the fact that it impacted, I guess, the direction you were heading. A very selfless thing to just focus on family, because that's what matters. That's what's important. If you think now, fast forward, you're principal infrastructure specialist, so I can imagine that no day is really the same. But if you had to give a general overview of a day in the life for anyone out there who maybe also sees himself as not this real whiz in maths, in science, but can pursue a career in this space, how would you describe it?
To echo your point, no 2 days are the same, which I think is part of the reason why I really really like my job. But to give a little bit of context, so I work more in technology sales, and so that on the surface, it's talking about how do you help the customer find the technology products and services that are going to help them in whatever they're endeavoring to do. So my particular focus is on cloud computing and how clients can use cloud computing for cost savings or innovation, or what have you, or probably more pressing given the pandemic, how to work remotely, or how to support a hybrid working model, so that if people want to come in the office, they can, but if they want to work remotely, they can do that as well. And so my job really is to get at the heart of not only what they're trying to do, but really understanding a lot about them, their approaches to technology, what's important to them, culture, because all of those things affect not only purchasing decisions, but they also affect whether or not a purchase is successful at the end of the day. If you're only worried about the features and benefits of something that's going to be offered, that's fine, but it may be at the sacrifice of, like, you're spending too much money, or you're not thinking about the other part of the business. And so I like this career because it you do need to have technical acumen for sure. I'm constantly talking to people who are in senior management to higher level IT operations. So being able to speak the language and understand where they're coming from is very important. But the focus here is more so on the business piece and communication. So for business, really understanding, so what is the context that my customer is operating in? What are the common challenges for the industry? What are their challenges specifically? And does that affect ultimately what I'm going to recommend that they move with? But then communication, again, I deal with people who are IT, but I also deal with people who are non-IT, and being able to talk about very technical subjects in a way that each audience will understand, so that we can have a common understanding, is also really, really, really important. So it doesn't really, you don't have to be a STEM rock star in school to necessarily have this career. I think it's more of, do you enjoy problem solving and critical analysis? Do you enjoy client interaction? And do you have a sense of urgency? Because you're very often working in very tight timelines, or people needed things yesterday. So all of those things, kind of matter. And if you like that variety and that rhythm, it can be a great career choice.
That's really interesting to hear because, again, there's that stigma still, I think, that working in technology means sat at a computer coding all the time. And I really think that's what does hold people back still to pursue, although it's changing, which is great. If you think about actually selling your non STEM skill set to a tech company, what advice can you share here?
It's funny when I give talks about what skills you'll want to focus on if you're trying to think about a career in tech. I very very often I'm like, yes, there's the hard or technical skill, but communication skills are so very important. And I think, again, with the pandemic and people having to virtually collaborate with one another, I think those skills have become much more, important. And considering that hybrid is probably going to be sticking around for quite some time, they last the test of time. I would say, like, just as you're spending the time of, if coding is where you ultimately want to land, learning languages, if user experience design is where you want to land, understanding human and computer interaction, all means, you definitely want to spend that time building that technical skill. But whenever possible, you should also be thinking about the professional, or sometimes called soft skills, because that really is going to set you apart from your colleagues. And I actually, it's very funny because every time I think about this, I think about a previous position that I had. And I remember going out to lunch with an engineer, a civil engineer, who happened to go to Northwestern, and brilliant man, knows his stuff. But when it came to, like, actually being able to talk about his work, or have like a conversation, it was very 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 difficult to kind of do that. It was almost like very short, 2 word, answers. And I think it illustrates a very important thing, that you can have all of this technical skill, but if it's in your head, and you can't explain it to people, and you can't talk with people about it, it sucks for us because we won't get your knowledge. But if you're someplace where you're in a business facing role, it kind of puts you in a bit of a detriment. And the funny thing about that was, apparently the engineering department at Northwestern decided that it was a requirement that all of the engineering students had to take at least 5 communications courses, because they were noticing that, like, this is a problem. we have brilliant engineers, and like, and the communication skill, and the collaboration skill, like, it wasn't coming through in interviews and in other places. So they were like, you have to take at least 5 communications courses.
One thing I would say is, you mentioned about things being more remote and connectivity being so important. I've also found as well that it's a great, I guess, way to build more confidence by doing more remote and virtual meetings and discussions. Sometimes people, when it's face to face, they can really, feel the nerves. Whereas if you just think of it as, although it's a bit difficult at times, like you're just speaking to your computer screen, I think it also breaks down that barrier. And in turn, you'll begin to gain more of a flow when you're speaking to people, asking questions. So when it comes to face, you'd like to think that you're quite well practiced.
Exactly. Yeah, and you hit on a very good point. So with, just like it is with developing technical skill, where you're trying and trying again, and you're learning from your mistakes, the same thing is true with professional skills, or soft skills. You need to find areas and ways to kind of practice that skill. So if that means, like, doing mock interviews, or like doing public speaking or writing, on a regular basis to kind of build your written communication skill. It's so super important, and I think for the next generation of technologists that are coming into the field, it's going to be even more so the ability to be able to communicate with one another, however that medium may look like.
I've definitely seen a trend from just like a recruitment perspective that a lot of companies are taking a slightly different approach to how they interview based on communication.
I think what sometimes gets lost in the mix as to why companies are looking for this is that regardless of whether you're a client facing role or another non client facing role within the company, each person that's there is an ambassador of the company and is representative of their values and beliefs and everything else, and they want people who not only know their stuff from a technical perspective, but are going to be able to convey the company's mission, the values, the beliefs competently. And so all of us, in these organizations are those representatives, and so it's almost crucial that those skills be there, because they take a lot longer to learn over time, but B, looking at it from the lens of a company perspective, anytime there's a miscommunication could be problematic, for them, like the errant, comment that shouldn't have been made, or like, or the thing that you probably should not have, said to your coworker for whatever reasons. So those things matter. And I think the emphasis of kind of focusing on both realms, I think is great, and I think it's needed.
With communication, it's the awareness, because like you say, things like microaggressions as well, people aren't necessarily aware of how they're delivering a question or delivering something, and just educating on that piece I think is really important and can make you an all-round fantastic employee, from a communication perspective, awareness perspective, and if you're hands-on with technical perspective. But with that in mind, obviously, I know that for you, you're extremely passionate about all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for us with the Equal Inspired podcast, this is something that we are continually striving for and always advocating. So I'd like to know, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you?
For me, it's not so much having the representation within the organization. It's having representation where everyone, regardless of where they are or who they are being paid fairly, are being treated equally, have the same advancement opportunities. Everyone is equal to one another, on the merit of their abilities, and given the chances to succeed and thrive in their positions, rather than it just be a sole focus on representation from different aspects of diversity. It's more meaningful when everyone has agency over their positions, over their career trajectory, where they have equal pay and opportunities for their counterparts. That's what it honestly means to me. It's like it's not just a buzzword or vanity. It's really thinking very deeply and holistically. How do we make sure that everyone that's in our organization feels valued and can bring all of themselves to work, versus feeling like they have to hide or they need to do more Herculean tasks to get promoted or get opportunity than, let's say, a counterpart that happens to not be a person of color or a woman.
What are some of the common mistakes that you've seen organizations make when it comes to DE&I?
Just speaking very candidly from some of the things that I've observed. So the first thing I think is treating DEI initiatives as a one and done type of exercise. Whereas, okay, we've taken the training, we've hired a person that is from a diverse population, and we're done, and that's all we need. And I don't the thing about DEI initiatives is that they should grow with the organization, and that they're always changing, and that they always need to be reviewed, and there should be performance indicators, and there should be accountability. It These require work and effort, and they shouldn't be looked as a checklist. It's something that companies need to work on a continual basis. The second observation is, I think there are times where people mistake that DEI is an extension of human resources work. And while I can understand where that would, kind of come in, I do think it's important for people to understand that DEI work is the responsibility of everybody in the organization. You may not necessarily be the person that's developing the DEI strategy and the plan, but as a member of an organization, you are responsible for upholding the DEI values of the organization. And when things are not going the way that they are, like, it is incumbent upon you to speak up and say something. So I think that's something that I would like to see more of. It not just be oh, that's an HR thing. It's like it's a whole organization, kind of thing to have. And then finally, and I think this is, I think we're at a point now where I'm glad to say this is not so much of an issue still, but using DEI almost as vanity versus something meaningful. And again, I think that many organizations are realizing that that's not how they want to come off, that, like, we're just doing this as a marketing ploy. And, like, I think people are really starting to get more genuine about their efforts versus this just looks nice because we might attract a certain demographic and it looks good for us. But having said that, there are definitely still instances where that is still the case. And so I would love to see it where I don't have a problem with people publicizing their DEI efforts. It's more of the matter of making sure that those efforts are genuine and that they're serving the communities that they're supposed to serve versus optics.
Certainly agree with you on that, Suzanne, that unfortunately there are some companies out there that feel that it may just attract the most diverse teams if they just say about it. But the issue that they come into is when people join their company and they're not embracing these values from a place where they really care and they're genuine about it, then they will lose their employees. This is where the retention issue comes into play, because if someone joins a business under the impression that they're really all for DE&I, they're running initiatives, this is their core value, and they're really genuine about it, and come into a business and there is no reflection of that whatsoever, this is the problem. And I've had some conversations recently with people who unfortunately had been in that situation. And I really hope we get to a place, like you say, where it's just based on being genuine, because I think as well people can see through that now. People are starting to see through this wall, this barrier of not being genuine with it. And I'm a little bit like you, Suzanne. I'm always of the view that, and I don't know if I'm greedy, but I'm just always with the view that it's never enough. Always have that mindset that it's never enough. Like, yes, we can have checklists, we can have goals and targets, but I always feel like it should be a continual thing that we're always doing. Some common mistakes I've seen as well is a company hits their target and they forget about doing all of these things and running these initiatives, and then they're almost 10 steps behind again because they're not continually doing what they should be doing to enhance this further. So that's really interesting to get your take on it. How do you feel we can ensure this organic, genuine diversity within organizations and not really have it being forced?
That's tougher. I think that's a tougher challenge. So first, I think that there are times where I often spend the time talking to people explaining what DE&I means exactly, and specifically when it comes to diversity. Certainly there's racial equality, racial, diversity, gender diversity. Um, but diversity really means, kind of looking at it from many, many other different dimensions, talking about professional experiences, economic backgrounds, cultural, political. So just really deeply thinking about what diversity is in that, that sense, I think is very important. I think what also tends to happen too is that um, I know that for some people there is a genuine indifference to, DEI. They're like, well, if I'm performing and if I'm, making my numbers and if my product's selling and everything else, why does it matter? And trying to combat that indifference. One of the things that I remember um, from my time in school was from persuasion class, and that was really talking about you have to meet people where their values and beliefs are, and start the discussion from there. Some people are kind of motivated from a sense of the moral imperative that comes with having more diverse and equitable and inclusive environments. But there are some people where it is a dollars and cents, you know, kind of conversation. And so for them, it's really putting it out to them that because there are many studies that kind of talk to all of these things, that having diverse populations actually helps you to be better in terms of innovation, in terms of the money that you're bringing in. Like, you are a stronger organization when you have a diverse, population. So, like, I think sometimes framing the conversation, depending on the audience, is a very important piece of it as well. As far as the organic, um, it's one of those things where I think it helps if you take the time to reach out to experts, especially if DEI is not work that you've commonly done, in the past. I think it's really important to reach out to organizations or people that can kind of guide you on this journey, to really understand the motivations, to understand what your goals are, so that your DEI makes sense for your organization versus I've got to do this because someone is telling me to, or the optics, or whatever the case may be. And it's hard. But if we want to have organic and authenticity in it, it's worth the effort and the time to do that, I think.
So reaching out to people who have expertise in this field, that's something that people should be doing, and being proactive in that. And like I say, I think what's important is you yourself doesn't necessarily have to be an expert, but if you've got that passion for wanting to make a change, that's really important. Your mission as well is to encourage girls and women of colour to enter STEM fields. So I'd really like to discuss what are some of the key hurdles and challenges for women of colour in this industry.
So I think there's the collective of just being a woman in technology. For all intents and purposes, it is still a male-dominated field, and unfortunately, you still have those people that believe that women are not on the same level when it comes to men in terms of technical capability and everything else. In fact, there was a tweet from I think a former University of Washington professor that basically said that we lost out on all these talented male technologists because we hired women for optics. And, like, it is 2022 and this is still a thing. So there's that very, very real thing. And then adding on, being a person of color, often coming into these environments where you're the one, or the few. And these environments are not necessarily inclusive to you. It's more about, the people of color trying to acclimate and assimilate to the larger population and fitting in. But at the same time, minimizing their own identity in the process. But not even talking about getting to that professional field, it's talking about the level of support that women of color kind of get from the start to getting to the professional field. having access to, STEM courses, being able to pay for college. One of the things that I discovered during the course of writing the book was that Black women were more likely to take on student loan debt just to go to college versus any other demographic at the time, and that can be very costly and very expensive. So it's that level of support that they get from their community, from academics, and when they start getting into the professional world, and if that support is weak or inconsistent, it can lead, unfortunately, to women of color just leaving the field altogether. For the book, I talked to many different women who were either starting their career or had been in the tech industry for many years. And for the women that had been in the field for many years, you can just hear the frustrations of all of the microaggressions, or the times where they had to do 3 times the work of their white male counterparts just to get a scintilla of success. I mean, it's eye opening, and it breaks your heart a little bit. That this is a theme. And while it is certainly getting better because of the visibility that's being brought to the issue, as well as all of the different organizations to help women of color become successful in these careers, it's still very much a challenge.
How can people be better allies and give that support to women of color?
I think for allies, there's actually a guide that's called the Guide to Allyship, which is this free online resource for people who are looking to become better at helping historically marginalized groups. And I think a lot of the advice that's on there is spot on. First, it's just education and owning your education. So meaning it's not so much like don't have a conversation with a person of color to understand their struggles and everything else, but don't make your education their responsibility. Take the time to read books. Take the time to attend webinars. Because there's plenty out there on the subject if you just look. So making sure that you take the ownership of kind of getting yourself up on the issues. The second is don't make blanket assumptions. Because I'm a woman of color, that does not mean that my experiences are the same as my counterpart. Like the way how I've lived my life, my experiences, my economic status, my age, all of these things kind of influence, who I am as a person. And that does not mean that my counterpart feels exactly the same way. It's really about treating people individual and meeting them, where they are. And then there's like speaking up, like when you see something or you hear something that like this doesn't sit right with me. This is not okay. Because unfortunately, by not speaking up, it kind of reinforces that the behaviors and the patterns are okay. And then the people of color, the people that feel that the most acutely, and they stifle it inside, or they just try to get through and do what they need to do. But it takes a mental toll, and so just making sure that you're if something happens, like don't and it's not right, don't just stand by and let it happen. There's plenty of ways that people can respond to when these things happen. They don't necessarily need to be grand, elaborate things. Like it's more about talking to a manager or talking to human resources or DEI. All of this to say, just don't do nothing.
I think that sometimes people can hold themselves back from speaking up because they're almost worried how it may come across. Do they want to offend people? Will they say the wrong thing when they speak up? Will they offend the person that they're defending? All of these different things. So I really love that piece of advice about just that there's so many different ways, just do it. Just do something.
I actually gave a talk about this a couple of months ago. It is not easy. There's a very good chance that there might be some reputational risk as well as you mentioned the fact that you might offend the person that you actually are trying to help. I would say though that in most cases, the staying silent is almost worse than than doing something in some cases, because the thing that comes with silence is that it's almost a quiet, like acquiescence that this is okay, like this is normal, this is normalized, and and we should go with the status quo. And that has this really horrible effect of just kind of continuing and building and festering. And so for the potential risks that come with speaking up, I think at most times they pale in comparison to not saying anything.
Yeah, find your voice and make a difference, because it's so important. We need more allies. We need that support system around us. You mentioned some really interesting research that you did for your book and so many different interviews. So I want to talk a little bit about Women of Color in Tech, your book. And can you share a little bit more about that process from conception to then launching and becoming published and now getting all of these different reviews?
So I went into the process of Women of Color in Tech thinking about like my own kind of journey, because I realized that there are many people, women of color, who have thought about tech careers but don't know where they stand, but also too like the limited opportunities to just thinking about, as you said, coding and or network engineering type jobs, which are tech jobs and they're very very good tech jobs, but they may not necessarily speak to your skills or your passion. And so when I went into writing the book, it was really thinking about my own journey and some of the things that I wish I had known earlier on, some of the things that worked for me, some of the things that, yeah, don't do this, don't scrape your knees like I did, in trying to do this, and just trying to really serve as kind of a guide on from, okay, I'm going to take this career endeavor and I'm going to do this, and here are some options and ways that I can go ahead and do that. Also thinking about it that it's not a linear process. Um, you know, Careers change, your thoughts about what you want to do are going to change, and that's really like okay. Like it's really really fine that those things are going to happen. And then like really being honest about the challenges that women of color are going to face. So we talk about microaggressions, but one of the things that I don't think gets talked about, at least at the time, very often is the effects of mental health for women of color. Tech workers specifically have, according to studies, have more of a tendency to have mental health concerns than perhaps some other professions. And just really just being honest and candid that like these are some known and sometimes not talked about challenges, and so this is what I have seen, what I've heard, my guidance, and in offering that to you. So just really trying to lay that out as best as I can and being transparent, and giving readers these are the options, these are the things that you can think about, and above all else is that tech needs women of color, needs women of color like yesterday, and like, and we're a driving force within the tech industry, and we need more wonderful women of color, as technologists in many different areas, and to, you have the support, you have the guidance, all you have to do is just have that passion and desire, and there will be people there to support you. So I was working full time at IBM at the time, so that meant that I was working and writing this book. And so most of my writing would take place like at 4 in the morning, when I knew that like nobody would be like emailing me or calling me. And then when I had to travel for work, like for a trade show, for a client meeting, It's really just about getting, the getting the writing in wherever you can. So I just, if you have to write on a notepad, like you just gotta do it. In terms of the actual like publishing, so the book came out in April of 2020, and this was right around the time the pandemic was really becoming more and more of a concern and an issue. And we originally were scheduled to have a book signing event at a Barnes and Noble in New York City. That ended up not happening because we started to see the seriousness of the of what was going on in the pandemic, and there was some concern that the book actually wouldn't, like the physical copy of the book wouldn't be available because the warehouse that the book had been printed was shut down for 2 weeks. So, so it was a very distinct possibility that like this was just going sideways. The bright side of all of this was the book. My book was the last one that ended up leaving the warehouse, so it did get
Wow.
it did end up getting like released to the public. But for the launch event, I actually invited people that I had interviewed for the book for like a virtual panel discussion, and I looking back, I loved it because it kind of typified what I thought was like the honesty and the about this issue, and offering means of support to audiences. So it all ended up working out. In terms of promotion, obviously the pandemic influenced that, so it was virtual, all the way. But I think it was, I mean, for me, it was a learning experience in many different ways. I'd never published a book. I had never written a book. I think the most I've written is like college papers, so I don't know if that counts. And so it was quite the endeavor, and then learning about the publishing industry and how that works, and then how the publishing industry works during a pandemic, like and how to react to that as quickly as humanly possible. So definitely, I learned so very much, and I'm richer for the experience, and I'm honored to have had the opportunity to do this.
That's a big step, coming out of your comfort zone, making that decision. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to interview all of these people and we're going to make it happen. We're going to publish it. So, what advice can you share to anyone else who wants to pursue something like that, but again is holding themselves back, maybe out of that fear of coming out of the comfort zone of judgments?
That's a great point, and trust me, I had trepidation, about it myself. So for transparency, I was actually approached by Wiley to write the book. When I tell people like I'm an accidental author, that is very, 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 very much true. So it was one of those things where I was nervous because, again, I've never written, professionally, and what am I going to say, and do I even have anything to say? My thoughts on it are this: is that sometimes we do have to take risks on ourselves, because taking these challenges make us better at everything that we do. And trust me, throughout all of the process, especially when I was getting, revisions back from my editor about potential changes and everything else, I was just like, oh no, I don't know. But that shouldn't be the thing that keeps you from keeping going. You may not always be successful. It may not always turn out the way that you may have originally intended, but I would say that you'll never know unless you actually try and you learn from it. It's kind of like what they say in most in most sports arenas, like you miss the 100% of the shots that you don't take, like and that's true here too. So I don't want anyone thinking that like I knew exactly what I was doing, and like there weren't mistakes, and like there's plenty. But what I've gained from this experience far, far, far exceeds anything that I could have ever have expected. And had I said no, I would never have experienced that.
Really love that quote that you mentioned, Suzanne. And if you think about your career now since the book has been published, what kind of wins have you seen here? Obviously, the community piece, making great connections with people, but how else has publishing this book impacted your career?
I think what's been really heartening for me is having more conversations with people who want to be allies. They really want to understand not only the issues, but how can they be a catalyst for change and how can they really, really help. And that was not something that I was honestly expecting when I originally wrote the book, that, people who weren't the target readers reaching out and kind of saying like, help me to, understand better. And especially at the time where there was a lot of civil unrest with the murder of George Floyd in the United States, those conversations were becoming more and more to the fore of like, how do I be meaningful about my allyship? How do I be better at this? What can I do? And so I think that piece has been the real surprise for me, and something that I'm really glad has happened.
That's really great to hear that you've had people being proactive and wanting to reach out to you. And I know community is something that's so important to you as well, and you're involved in many initiatives. So I'm wondering, how can people find or create a tribe of supportive women in STEM?
It takes time, finding where, your tribe. And I would say just as much as the book opportunity, it's putting yourself out there. There are a lot of professional organizations that cater to providing that community to like-minded people. I list a number, in the book, but some other resources that can also be helpful too. One of the things I'm an advocate for is networking with people. And the pandemic has unfortunately kind of changed the dynamic of what networking kind of looks like. And instead of it being in person, now it's kind of virtual. All that being said, it's still it's still doable in terms of reaching out to people who have interesting experiences or interesting stories, and just really saying, hey, would just love to, get some time on your calendar to kind of understand your journey, and if you have any advice. And LinkedIn for me has been, one of the best tools, for doing that amongst many others. So I would say just really taking the time to reach out to people who inspire you, you want to learn more from, and kind of building that, relationship over time. But also making sure to seek out those affinity or professional organizations that also provide a sense of community and the common understanding of the challenges, you're facing, as well as some of the things that you're looking forward to in the future, and the goals that you want to achieve.
Suzanne, thank you so much for sharing your insights, for your time. It has been so good to speak with you. And again, we're so excited that you're our first guest on Equal Inspired.
Ellie, thank you. This has been terrific. I've had a wonderful time. And again, I'm really honored, and congratulations on your inaugural episode.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, and we hope you're feeling inspired. If you are, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, and join us on our mission to create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable universe. This podcast is brought to you by Equal IT, a mission-driven business working to diversify tech teams through refined talent acquisition, complemented by diversity and inclusion consulting. As an Azure Heroes inclusive leader, we aim for teams to cultivate a strong sense of belonging and equity. Find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We welcome your feedback, questions, and would love to hear from you. Join us next time on Equal Inspired.